My name is Emily. I was 27 years old when I learned the difference between letting things slide and letting someone walk all over you. This is the story of how my boyfriend betrayed me, how I caught the signs too late, and how I served him the kind of revenge that still makes me smile years later. He never knew it was me, and honestly, that's the best part. Before I get into it, if you love stories where the bad guy gets exactly what's coming to him and the ending is just as satisfying as you're hoping for, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, because this one, you're going to want to stay until the last sentence. When I met Mark, I thought I had finally hit the jackpot. He was 29, tall, with this easy, boyish smile that made you forget whatever you were stressed about. He had this energy, the kind that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. We met at a friend's game night. He was in the kitchen, awkwardly trying to open a bottle of wine without a corkscrew. I made a joke about it. He laughed, and somehow we ended up talking the entire evening. By the time I left, he had my number, and I had butterflies. The first few months were exactly what every girl hopes for. Thoughtful texts in the morning, impromptu coffee dates, him showing up with flowers just because. And maybe the part I liked most, the way he would really listen when I talked. He had a quirky hobby too, sewing. Not exactly what you expect from a guy like him, but he was passionate about it. He'd make little pouches, shirts, even costumes for his nieces and nephews. The way his face lit up when he talked about fabric, it was honestly adorable. But somewhere around the 8-month mark, little cracks started to show. It began with money. The first time it didn't even register as a red flag. We were out at dinner, this nice little Italian place, when the bill came, and he patted his pockets with this sheepish grin. "Babe, I'm so sorry. I must have left my card at home. Do you mind covering this one? I'll get the next." Of course I didn't mind. Things happen. And the way he said it, apologetic, grateful, it felt like no big deal. Except it happened again. And again, and again. At first I told myself he was just going through a rough patch. He was between jobs for a bit, then started freelancing. I wanted to be supportive. But over time, it stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a pattern. By the time we got to our last few dates, the pattern was impossible to ignore. 5 or 6 times in a row, he'd come up short or his card would mysteriously decline. And there I was, smiling, paying, telling myself that love means being there for someone when they're struggling. Then came that night, our last date, though of course I didn't know it at the time. We were at our usual Mexican restaurant. Mark ordered the most expensive entree on the menu, and halfway through, leaned over the table with that boyish grin. "If you'll buy again tonight, babe, when my check hits next week, I'll take you to a super nice dinner. Promise." I laughed. "Sure, you're on." And in my head I thought, maybe this time he means it. After dinner, we walked hand in hand down the street and grabbed ice cream. It was one of those perfect summer nights. Warm air, streetlights glowing soft gold. We ended up at Joann's, his favorite fabric store. Mark was like a kid in a candy shop. He ran his fingers over rolls of cotton, paused to hold up a shimmering satin to the light, muttering about how it would be perfect for a shirt he'd been imagining. We wandered the aisles for nearly an hour before he stopped in front of this one bolt of fabric. deep navy with a subtle herringbone weave that caught the light in the most beautiful way. He held it against his chest like it was treasure. "This is the one," he said, grinning. "I'll have to come back for it next week when I get paid." I smiled, thinking how nice it was to see him so excited about something. If only I had known. That fabric would be the key to the sweetest revenge I've ever pulled in my life. 2 days after our fabric store trip, I was at home, curled up on the couch with my laptop, when my phone lit up. FaceTime from Mark. That alone was strange. He was more of a send a text kind of guy, unless he really wanted to see me. I swiped to answer, smiling. "Hey, you." Except he wasn't smiling back. His face looked tight, almost rehearsed. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot, and I just don't think this is working anymore." I blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" He sighed, like I was making it harder for him than it had to be. I'm getting back with Lena." It took me a second to place the name. Then it hit me. Lena, his ex, the one he'd once described as toxic and manipulative, the one he said had crushed his self-esteem. I opened my mouth, but he kept talking. We have history, you know? And I think I owe it to us to give it another shot. And then he started sprinkling in little daggers, comments about how maybe we weren't a good match, how I was too independent and didn't really need him. It was like standing in the middle of a storm you didn't see coming. When he finally hung up, I just sat there, staring at the black screen. The promise of that super nice dinner next week? Gone. The man I thought I'd been building something with? Gone. And the worst part? He didn't even sound sorry. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice, felt the weight of that dismissal. My mind kept replaying the last few months, looking for clues I'd missed. And then the memories started lining up. The forgotten wallet, the card declines, the carefully timed "next week I'll pay you back." He'd never once followed through. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about trust, about the fact that while I was covering our dinners, he was already texting his ex behind my back. By morning, my sadness had shifted into something sharper, a low, steady burn in my chest. 2 days later, I was out running errands when I passed Joanne's, and like a movie scene, my feet slowed, my head turned, and the thought hit me like a lightning bolt. That fabric, the one he'd spent an hour obsessing over, the one he couldn't wait to come back for. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and right then, a plan began to take shape. Small, quiet, but perfectly satisfying. I pulled into the parking lot, my heart beating faster than it should have. Inside, the store was nearly empty, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I walked to the back, where the fabric bolts stood in neat rows like soldiers. It didn't take me long to find it. Deep, navy herringbone, just like I remembered. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the texture, imagining Mark's face if he came back and it was gone. But I didn't buy one bolt. I bought all of it. The woman at the counter raised her eyebrow as she started unrolling it, measuring yard after yard. "Big project?" I smiled, my voice calm. Something like that. By the time I left, my arms were full and my wallet was several $100s lighter, but I didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a reclamation. Of course,
I wasn't keeping it. I had a better use for it. I drove straight to a small workshop on the edge of town, a place I'd visited once before during a community fair. The seamstress there, an older woman named Marcy, ran a nonprofit that made clothes for families in need. When I walked in, she looked up from her sewing machine, surprised. "Emily, what a nice surprise!" I set the stack of fabric on her cutting table. "I have a donation." Her eyes widened. "This is beautiful. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said, meaning it. "I think you'll put it to much better use than it would have had otherwise." She thanked me over and over, but I just smiled, wished her a good day, and walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That night, I blocked Mark's number. No confrontation, no parting words, just silence. Some might say that's not much of a revenge, but to me, it was perfect. Because somewhere, a week later, Mark would walk into Joann's, eager to finally buy that fabric. He'd scan the shelves, growing more frantic as he realized it was gone. He'd ask the staff, maybe even check other locations, but no matter where he looked, it wouldn't be there. And he'd never, ever know that I was the reason why. What I didn't realize at the time was that this small act, this quiet, satisfying twist, was just the first step, because life, as it turned out, wasn't done giving me ways to even the score. After I blocked Mark's number, I thought that would be the end of it. I'd pictured him standing in Joann's, scanning the aisles in frustration, maybe even feeling that same little sting of loss he'd left me with. But here's the thing about breakups, especially messy ones. The world has a way of keeping you tangled in the other person's orbit longer than you want. It started with whispers. A friend of a friend saw Mark and Lena out together at a coffee shop. Another spotted them at the farmer's market, laughing like they were in some picture-perfect rom-com. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was over it. But every time his name floated into conversation, a little knot twisted in my stomach. What gnawed at me wasn't jealousy. It was the timeline. The way Lena slid back into his life so quickly. The way he'd seemed almost prepared when he broke up with me, like he'd rehearsed it. And then, about 2 weeks later, the pieces started clicking into place. I was grabbing lunch with my friend Katie, the same friend who had introduced me to Mark in the first place. She stirred her iced tea and leaned across the table. "You're not going to like this, but I think you should know." My chest tightened. "Know what?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Mark and Lena, they didn't just reconnect after you two split. They'd been talking for months, like while he was still with you." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Months?" "Yeah, someone saw them having lunch together back in April, and you guys didn't break up until June, right?" It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind replayed every late-night work session, every "bad signal, I'll call you tomorrow" text, every time I'd been left waiting while he ran errands. And suddenly, I saw it all for what it was. That night, I sat on my couch, staring out the window at the dark street below, and felt my resolve harden. The fabric stunt had been satisfying, poetic, even. But now I wanted more. Not screaming in his face, not sending him angry texts. No, that would be too easy for him to brush off. I wanted something deeper. Something that would leave a mark he couldn't shake. The turning point came faster than I expected. One Saturday morning, about 3 weeks after our breakup, I went to a local flea market with my cousin. We were weaving through stalls of handmade crafts, vintage records, and food trucks when I saw it. A booth selling custom garments, dresses, shirts, tote bags, all neatly displayed, each one tagged with a little card that said, "Handmade by Lena and Mark." I stopped dead. There they were, side by side behind the booth. Lena was chatting with a customer, and Mark was folding a pile of fabric. Not the navy herringbone, thankfully, but enough to make my blood heat. The sight was like a slap in the face, not because they were together, I'd made my peace with that part, but because of what it meant. He'd taken his passion, the thing he used to share with me, and wrapped it up in a shiny little project with her. Like our time together had just been a warm-up act for his real partnership. I didn't go up to them, didn't make a scene. Instead, I stood off to the side, pretending to browse another stall, and I listened. It turned out they were selling more than just clothes. They were taking custom orders. A couple asked if they could make a wedding outfit, and Mark beamed, promising it would be ready in a month. And that's when the idea came to me. Not right away. It started as a flicker, but by the time I walked out of that flea market, it had grown into a fully formed plan. I wasn't going to just inconvenience him like I did with the fabric. I was going to disrupt the very thing he was trying to build with Lena. That evening, I called Katie. "Do you still have that cousin who works at the Chamber of Commerce?" She laughed. "Yeah? Why?" I need some information about vendor permits, hypothetically speaking." Over the next week, I learned two important things. One, Mark and Lena's little flea market booth wasn't technically registered. They were supposed to have a vendor's license, but hadn't filed the paperwork. And two, they were also using patterns and designs from online creators without permission. Something that, if the right people found out, could get them banned from selling at certain events. Now, I wasn't about to ruin someone's entire livelihood out of spite, but a little hiccup in their perfect operation? That was fair game. I spent 2 days compiling screenshots, order forms, and a few photos I'd discreetly taken at the flea market. Then I sent an anonymous email to the market organizers, pointing out the missing permits and the copyright complaint. I didn't need to sign my name. The facts spoke for themselves. A week later, Katie texted me, "You're gonna love this." Attached was a photo of an empty booth space at the flea market, the "Handmade by Lena and Mark" sign lying on the ground. Apparently, the organizers had given them a warning and told them they couldn't sell again until they fixed the paperwork and resolved the copyright complaint, which, according to the gossip meal, meant they'd lose out on two of the biggest market weekends of the summer. I stared at the photo for a long moment, then set my phone down. It wasn't just satisfaction I felt. It was closure. The kind that comes from knowing the other person is finally dealing with the consequences of their choices. But even as I savored that quiet victory, a part of me knew this story wasn't done yet. Because karma was just getting warmed up. After the flea market booth got shut down, I figured that was it. A neat, clean chapter closed. I didn't need to see their faces, hear their excuses, or explain my role in it. But then, the universe dangled a little temptation in front of me. It happened at a friend's birthday dinner, a week after the market drama. I was halfway through my second glass of wine when an old acquaintance leaned over and said, "Oh, did you hear? Mark and Lena are starting an online store now. Guess the flea market wasn't their thing." I froze, my fork hovering midair. An online store? "Yeah," she said, lowering her voice like she was letting me in on a secret. "They're doing a launch party in 2 weeks. Small gathering, friends, customers, a few influencers they know." My first instinct was to roll my eyes and let it go. But as the night went on, that little knot of irritation started to twist tighter. It wasn't just that they were bouncing back. It was that they were doing it with this smug, untouchable energy, like nothing could touch them. And that didn't sit right with me. The red herring came in the form of a rumor. A few days after the dinner, Katie called me. You're gonna laugh, but apparently Mark's online store is using the same name as another small business in the state, a candle shop. They've been around for years. I perked up. That's interesting, right? I don't know if they know yet, but if the candle people find out... She let the thought trail off, but I could hear the smile in her voice. That was all the encouragement I needed. I looked up the candle shop, found their Instagram, and sent them a friendly little message. Hey, not sure if you're aware, but there's a new clothing store using your exact business name. Thought you want to know before it gets confusing for customers. Within hours, they replied, Thanks for the heads up. We'll look into it. For a couple of days, I thought maybe that would be my next big move. Let the candle shop take them down with a trademark complaint. Sit back, enjoy the fallout. But here's the thing about relying on other people's battles. You can't control the pace, and you can't control the punch. And I wanted precision. So I started planning something more personal. I knew Mark and Lena would be inviting people from our shared social circles to that launch party, which meant inevitably I'd hear about it afterwards. The reviews, the photos, the gushing congratulations posts. I decided I'd be ready before they even opened their doors. The first step was research. I set up a new email, untraceable, generic, and subscribed to their newsletter. Sure enough, within days, I had all the details. The store name, the product catalog, the pricing. It was laughable, honestly. They were charging boutique prices for items that were clearly made with bargain bin fabric. And worse, I recognized a few of the designs. Patterns lifted directly from online creators, just like before. The second step was finding the right audience. I remembered a Facebook group I'd once joined for independent designers. They were very protective of their work, and for good reason. Plagiarism is rampant in that space. With a few careful screenshots and some side-by-side comparisons, I posted a polite but pointed message. Hi, I came across a store that appears to be selling garments identical to some of the designs I've seen shared here. Not sure if it's a coincidence, but I thought the creators might want to take a look. I didn't mention names. I didn't link directly. I just planted the seed. Within a day, the group was buzzing. People were tagging each other, dissecting the photos, debating whether it was theft, and slowly, links to Mark and Lena's store started popping up. By the time the launch party rolled around, they were already in defensive mode. I heard from Katie, who got the scoop from someone invited, that half the event was spent explaining to guests that it's all a misunderstanding and we're totally within our rights. It wasn't the total collapse I had imagined. Not yet, but it was enough to take the shine off their big night. Enough to plant doubt in their customers' minds before they even made a purchase. Looking back, that phase of my revenge was almost surgical. Precise, subtle, clean. But as satisfying as it was, I still thought maybe that was the peak, that the story would fade out from there. I was wrong, because a few weeks later, I stumbled across something that took my quiet little vendetta to a new entire level. Something that wasn't just about Mark, or Alina, or stolen designs. Something that could make the whole house of cards come crashing down. About 3 weeks after the launch party debacle, I'd pretty much moved on from actively thinking about Mark and Lena. Sure, I still got the occasional update from friends, a snippet here, a rumor there, but I wasn't out hunting for drama. I figured I'd already had my victories and karma could take it from here. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, I was scrolling aimlessly on my phone when something caught my eye. It was a post in a local community group, one of those where people share recommendations, small business promos, and neighborhood news. A woman had posted a photo of a dress she'd ordered from a new local clothing brand, praising it for the style but complaining about the quality. And there it was. The brand name. Mark and Lena's store. Normally, I'd just have smirked and kept scrolling. But the photo, that's what stopped me. I knew that dress. Not because I'd seen it at the flea market or online, but because I'd seen it in a completely different context, months before. It was identical, down to the stitching and pocket placement, to a design from a boutique in another state, a boutique I'd visited once while traveling for work. I still followed their Instagram because I loved their aesthetic. My curiosity flared. I opened Instagram, searched the boutique's page, and sure enough, there was the exact dress, posted almost a year ago. It wasn't just inspired by the design, it was the design. The same pattern, same cut, even the same unique fabric choice. The only difference? The boutiques looked like it was made with care. The one in the community group photo looked like it had been stitched together in a rush. I sat back, my mind buzzing. I'd assumed before that Mark and Lena were lifting designs from online creators, but this was different. This boutique wasn't just some anonymous seller. They were a registered business, one with a loyal following and a strong online presence. And if I knew anything about businesses like that, they protected their intellectual property like a mother bear protects her cubs. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this could be the thread that unraveled everything. But I didn't want to act on impulse. I'd learned that the best revenge wasn't about rage. It was about precision, timing, making sure that when you pull the trigger, the shot lands exactly where you want it. So, I started watching. Over the next few days, I monitored Mark and Lena's store like it was my job. They'd posted that same dress in multiple colors, proudly tagging it as our signature summer piece. Customers were commenting with heart emojis and questions about sizing. They were actively promoting it, which meant if the boutique saw this, it wouldn't just be a small problem, it would be a public, undeniable case of design theft. Still, a part of me hesitated. Not because I felt bad, that ship had sailed long ago, but because I wanted to be sure. That's when I decided to go one step further. I ordered the dress. Using a prepaid card and a shipping address that wasn't my own, I placed an order on their site. When it arrived a week later, I opened the package on my kitchen counter like it was evidence in a case. And sure enough, the label inside wasn't even theirs. It was from a bulk clothing supplier overseas, the kind that sells wholesale garments you can slap your own branding on. They hadn't even made them. Mark's big passion project, the thing he used to gush about when we were together, wasn't even real anymore. It wasn't handmade, it wasn't crafted with care, it was mass-produced, imported, and resold at triple the price. The discovery hit me in two ways. First, I felt that little rush of validation, the kind you get when your instincts are dead on. Second, I realized this wasn't just a moral issue. This was a legal one. And if they'd done it with this dress, chances are they'd done it with other pieces too. That night, I pulled up the boutique's website, found their contact email, and drafted a message. I didn't sign my name. I didn't explain who I was. I just attached photos of the dress I'd received, screenshots of Mark and Lena's Instagram posts, and a link to their online store. In the subject line, I wrote, "Possible copyright violation. Your design being resold without credit." Then, I hit send. For a few days, nothing happened. I went about my life, almost forgetting about the email. Then, on a Monday morning, I opened Instagram and saw it. The boutique had posted a story thanking a kind follower for alerting them to a stolen design. They didn't name names, but the next slide showed a blurred-out screenshot of Mark and Lena's listing with the caption, "We'll be taking immediate action." My stomach flipped, in the best way. By the end of that week, Mark and Lena's signature summer piece had vanished from their store. Not a single mention of it remained. And though they tried to fill the gap with new posts, I noticed something else. Their follower count was dropping. The boutique's followers were their target customers, and now those people knew the truth. It would have been enough for me to stop there, but fate had one more card to play. Because in the process of monitoring their store, I stumbled on something else. Something messier. While scrolling through their tagged photos, I saw a picture from a private account. The caption read, "Thanks to Lena and Mark for making our engagement outfits." The account belonged to a woman I didn't recognize, but her posts, they told a story. In one, she was in Mark's car. In another, she was at his apartment. I recognized the couch, the framed art, and the timestamps. Recent. Very recent. I didn't know if Lena knew. I didn't know if this woman was a client, a friend, or something else. But I knew one thing. The dynamic between them wasn't purely professional. And if there's one thing I've learned, the fastest way for someone like Mark to lose everything is for the truth to come from his own camp.
The discovery gnawed at me for days. Not just the stolen designs, not just the boutique takedown, but the woman. The one posting cozy little moments in Mark's apartment, while Lena was still posting "My Forever" captions. It wasn't my business. Not really. But it felt like the universe had handed me a loaded gun. And all I had to do was decide whether to pull the trigger. I didn't want to be reckless. I've learned, both in life and in revenge, that the most effective blows are the ones you aim slowly, deliberately, with steady hands. So first, I had to know, was this woman just a friend, or was she another me? I created a burner account and followed her. She followed back within the hour, probably thinking I was just another potential customer. Her grid told the whole story. Late-night selfies in Mark's hoodie, a video of him laughing behind the camera as she tried on clothes in what was clearly his bedroom, a boomerang of their hands, hers with a ring on her middle finger, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. The captions weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The intimacy was obvious. And the timestamps? They overlapped perfectly with Lena's date night posts. The air around me felt electric. I could have sent the screenshots to Lena anonymously. I could have posted them publicly and let chaos reign. But something about that felt too easy, too quick. No, I wanted to see his face when his house of cards started collapsing. That's when I decided to show up in person. It wasn't hard to find out where they'd be. Their store had posted about a special pop-up event at the same flea market where they'd launched, the perfect full-circle moment. I arrived late in the afternoon, when the sun was low and the crowd had thinned just enough for voices to carry. The first thing I saw was Lena, arranging dresses on a rack, smiling at a customer. She looked tired. Not in the "I worked hard" way, but in the "I've been carrying a load I don't want to admit is heavy" way. Mark was behind the counter, leaning on one elbow, scrolling through his phone. When he looked up and saw me, his smile froze halfway. "Wow," he said, voice just a little too high. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I bet you didn't," I said. My tone was calm, almost casual, like we were old friends catching up. Lena glanced over, her curiosity obvious. "Do you two know each other?" she asked. Mark laughed, but it was that brittle, defensive laugh. "Yeah, from way back. Before you." "Not way back. More like right before you." Lena's eyes flicked between us. Okay, she said slowly. I didn't break eye contact with Mark. Funny thing, though, I've been keeping up with your business. Impressive stuff. Though I have to say, I was a little surprised to see your signature piece disappear from your store so suddenly. What happened? Copyright trouble? Mark's face tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. I shrugged. Sure you don't. It was subtle, but Lena's posture changed, just slightly. A shift in her shoulders, a narrowing of her eyes. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough to recognize there was a story here. That was my opening. Oh, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I said, and speaking of surprises, I tapped to open my burner account and brought up the cozy posts. I tilted the screen toward Lena, not in a flashy, theatrical way, but like I was showing her a funny meme. Her expression went still, then tightened. Mark stepped around the counter. What are you doing? His voice had dropped, low and sharp. I kept my eyes on Lena. Just thought you'd want to see what your forever was doing in his free time. Looks like history really does repeat itself, huh? The silence between the three of us was thick enough to choke on. Lena didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at me anymore. She turned to Mark, phone still in her hand, and said, "We'll talk about this later." Her tone was quiet, but there was steel in it. I could see the panic in his eyes, not because I'd embarrassed him in front of me, but because Lena wasn't making a scene. She was tucking it away for later. Quiet anger is always worse. I took a step back, giving them space, and said, "Well, I'll let you two work that out. Just wanted to stop by and say hi. Oh, and Mark." He looked at me like he was bracing for a slap. "Next time you pick fabric, you might want to buy it before someone else does." I walked away without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to stay and watch the implosion happen in real time, but I knew the best part of a good confrontation is leaving them with the fallout. 2 days later, the woman from the Instagram account posted a story, a picture of herself at a bar captioned, "Single Again." Lena's profile went dark. No posts, no stories, their store page stopped updating, and the next time I checked, the entire account was gone. It was like they'd vanished overnight. I don't know if Lena ever figured out the full extent of Mark's mess, the stolen designs, the fake branding, the serial cheating, but I do know one thing. The truth has a way of spreading even when no one says it out loud. And me? I slept like a baby. The thing about revenge is that it's not always a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a quiet dismantling, a slow bleed that leaves the target looking around, wondering when they started to sink. Mark's unraveling began almost immediately after that flea market confrontation. 3 days later, my burner account got a DM, not from Lena, but from the seamstress I donated the fabric to months earlier. "Hey," she wrote, "you'll never believe who just came in here looking for that same fabric. Said it was urgent for a client." Guess who? I didn't have to guess. She followed up with a laughing emoji and told him it was all gone months ago. The mental image of his face in that moment, realizing I'd outmaneuvered him before the game even started, was enough to make me grin like an idiot in the middle of my coffee shop. Lena, on the other hand, had gone completely silent online. No posts, no stories, no tagged pictures. The boutique's Instagram was dead. Their website, too. Even their Etsy link redirected to an error page. It was like the business had been scrubbed from the internet entirely. I didn't hear directly from her, but I heard about her. Mutual acquaintances, people I'd met through craft fairs and local events, started dropping little tidbits without realizing I was connected to the story. Yeah, that couple with the handmade clothes split up. She moved back in with her sister. Apparently, he's been couch surfing, couldn't make rent on his own. One woman leaned in like she was telling me state secrets and whispered,
I heard he tried to pitch his designs to another boutique, but word's gotten around that he's difficult to work with. I didn't spread the gossip. I didn't need to. The beauty of a small creative community is that reputations aren't just made here, they're preserved, for better or worse. Once people catch a whiff of dishonesty, it clings. Mark had spent so long pretending to be a visionary, a charming creative genius. But without Lena smoothing his rough edges, without her work ethic and connections, the truth started leaking through the cracks. One night, I got another DM, this time from someone I didn't know at all, a young woman with a profile full of sewing projects. Hey, weird question, were you ever involved with Mark S.? I stared at her message for a moment before typing back, yeah, why? Her reply came fast, because I think we have the same story. We ended up on the phone for almost 2 hours. She told me about how they dated briefly after Lena, how he'd love-bombed her, promised her a future, then started borrowing money when his clients were late paying. Sound familiar? She said he'd ghosted her after she confronted him about seeing flirty texts from another woman. 2 weeks later, she found out he'd used some of her fabric stash to make pieces he tried to sell as his own work. It was surreal, like listening to my own history on loop, only with slightly different details. By the end of the call, she said, honestly, hearing what you did, it's kind of healing, to know someone got one over on him. That stuck with me. Revenge isn't therapy, I know that. But there's something deeply satisfying about knowing you've not only freed yourself from someone's mess, but maybe made it harder for them to repeat the cycle. Weeks passed. Mark's name came up less and less. The last update I got was that he moved 2 towns over and was trying to reinvent himself as a freelance designer. But even there, his past had a way of catching up to him. Someone recognized him at a fabric wholesaler and told me later, the look on his face when he realized he wasn't anonymous anymore, priceless. As for me, life moved on. I focused on my own work, picked up more custom orders, and poured my energy into projects that had nothing to do with him or the chaos he left behind. I thought maybe the whole saga had finally settled into the past. Then, one afternoon, while sorting through my phone, I came across the screenshots from his other girlfriend's posts. For a moment, I hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. Not out of spite, not out of a desire to stir the pot again, but because those images weren't just proof of what he'd done, they were a reminder of what I'd survived and how I'd refused to let him write the ending. That's the thing people don't tell you about revenge. It's never just about payback. It's about reclaiming something that was taken from you, your dignity, your voice, your narrative. And in my case, it wasn't the confrontation that satisfied me most. It was the quiet aftermath, the knowledge that I'd walked away with my integrity intact while his life slowly collapsed under the weight of his own choices. Months later, I ran into Lena at a farmer's market. She looked lighter, healthier. She was selling hand-dyed scarves under her own name, no mark in sight. We didn't talk about the past directly. She just smiled and said, "Thanks," in a way that told me she knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. I smiled back. Anytime. And that was that. Mark, he's a ghost now, at least in my world. No more DMs, no sightings, no whispers of his latest scheme. And if he's out there trying to rebuild, well, good luck finding a fabric store that doesn't already know his name. Looking back, I realized my revenge wasn't just about taking the fabric or confronting him at the flea market. It was about building a world where he didn't get to profit off my kindness, my ideas, or my silence ever again. And in that sense, it wasn't just sweet revenge.
I thought I'd closed the book on Mark. Packed it, taped it shut, stuck it in the back of the mental closet where all the bad ex stories go. But life has a funny way of testing your resolve. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd stopped into the big craft supply warehouse, the kind of place where you can lose hours just touching different fabrics, to grab materials for a wedding order. The moment I stepped through the automatic doors, I froze. There he was, Mark, standing at the counter, charm cranked up to full volume, talking to the manager like he'd just invented sewing itself. For a split second, our eyes didn't meet, and in that second, I had a choice. Walk away quietly, or lean into the universe's little gift. He was holding a swatch book, pointing to something on the page. I caught the tail end of a sentence. And of course I'd need the entire bolt if you can reserve it for me. I've got a big client waiting. The manager, a woman I'd chatted with dozens of times before, noticed me hovering and waved me over. "Hey, haven't seen you in a while." Mark turned, and there it was, that flicker, that flash of recognition before he pasted on his smile. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a dramatic reaction. I just walked up to the counter, glanced at the swatch he had been pointing to, and said to the manager, perfectly calm, "Oh, that's funny. I bought the last of that fabric a month ago, donated all of it to the community sewing program." The manager's eyebrows shot up. Mark's smile faltered. "That's right. We haven't been able to restock it since. Guess your client's out of luck." Mark tried to pivot, mumbling something about having other options, but I could see the way his shoulders tensed, the way his voice lost that performative ease. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. Sometimes the quietest moments do the loudest damage. I paid for my own order, wished the manager a good day, and walked out without looking back. It wasn't until I got home, unpacked my supplies, and sat down with a cup of tea that I realized something. Revenge had long since stopped being about making him hurt. The real payoff was that I no longer did. That's the twist people rarely talk about. The fact that when you reclaim your story, the person who wronged you becomes irrelevant. I wasn't carrying him around anymore. Not in my anger, not in my hurt, not even in my need for vindication. And that's when the real final act unfolded. About a week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Mark, from the community seamstress I'd donated all that fabric to. Inside was a thank you card, but not just any thank you card. She'd included photos. Beautiful, vibrant garments she and her students had made from the fabric. Dresses, coats, quilts, even a few pieces for local shelters. On the back of one photo, she'd written, "This fabric has changed lives here. Thank you for trusting us with it." I stared at those pictures for a long time, my chest tight in the best possible way. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark wanted that fabric for a vanity project. I wanted it to take away his toy, but in the end, it became something so much bigger, something that had nothing to do with him at all. The revenge had been sweet. The impact? Even sweeter. And here's the part I never could have planned. About a month later, at a local art fair, one of the community seamstresses students approached me. A teenager, shy but smiling, wearing a jacket made from the very fabric I'd bought that day. She said, "I just wanted to say thanks. I never had anything this nice before, and now I'm learning how to make my own." She had no idea about the history behind that fabric, no clue about Mark, the breakup, or the hours I'd spent wandering Joann's with him. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Walking away from that conversation, I realized my so-called revenge had evolved into something else entirely. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a redistribution of resources, of energy, of joy, away from someone who would have wasted it, toward people who were actually building something. Mark will probably always be out there somewhere, spinning his next story, looking for his next audience, but not here, not in my life. Because the final moral isn't about how you make them pay, it's about how you make yourself free. And freedom, I've learned,
isn't loud. It's quiet. It's sitting in your own space on a Tuesday night, sewing something beautiful, knowing that you're the one holding the needle now. It's the sound of the phone not ringing with some half-baked excuse. It's the relief of never wondering when the other shoe will drop because you've already walked away barefoot. So yes, my ex dumped me for his ex. Yes, I bought every scrap of the fabric he wanted and made sure he never touched it. But the part I'll remember years from now isn't his face when he realized what I'd done. It's the jacket on that teenager at the art fair. It's the thank you card from the seamstress. And it's the knowledge that in choosing my revenge, I accidentally chose my own healing too. And maybe that's the real moral. Sometimes you start a story thinking you're the avenger. But if you're lucky, really lucky, you end up the hero instead.